Hello and welcome to the Birchal Podcast. My name is Emily Macfarlane. I am your host. Today I am joined by Simon Hewitt, who is the founder of OtherPay, which is a payment platform that is trying to eliminate the problem that we have with card fraud. Thank you so much, Simon, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So can you give me a little bit of an explanation? Obviously, card fraud, identity fraud is a huge problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody isn't aware of the issues that this is causing all across the world with so many people.
Mm-hmm.
Why have you gone down this route and what are you looking to achieve?
Looking to achieve. So in terms of what are we looking to achieve? So my background has been sort of within the banking sector, looking at the problems that exist and the prevalence of solutions that detect the problem, retrospectively try to deal with the problem, or liability shifts that make consumers feel protected such that if they're defrauded, maybe they don't end up having to pay for it. But there's some fundamental issues lost within that if you go around sort of thinking that, well, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm defrauded, bank's going to pay for it or the merchant's going to pay for it. Therein lies one of the major problems in that, yeah, fine, the consumer may be okay, but what about the bank? Okay, the banks may make enough money, but they're still losing money.
Right.
And if you look at the banks the same as an insurance company, why do you pay more insurance premiums? Because people are claiming all the time. So from a security perspective, if we continue to lose, then you're going to pay for it, whether it's merchants increasing their prices, whether it's banks increasing fees. Everybody is a victim.
Right.
So on the basis of that, it's fair enough for somebody to suggest that, well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to get my money back from the bank. But somebody loses. So on the basis of that, I was coming out sort of thinking, I want to provide a solution to those that are prepared to use it. It's not a one size fits all. Because we could sit here and talk about Apple Pay and various other solutions that exist. Sure. And also those people, it's like, I don't want the added friction of that. That's fine. But there are plenty of people out there that are vulnerable, susceptible, want a solution that's going to help them solve the problem. Not just for themselves, but for the merchants, for the banks. They think it's the right thing to do. So that's the premise of the whole thing, is that if there's a solution that we can put in the hands of somebody who, if they use it as it should be used, could actually fix the problem, what's bad about that?
Right. So how does your solution differ from a solution that a bank or a card manufacturer might already have in place?
So put simply, if you split it from a purchasing perspective, OtherPay looks at purchasing, it looks at identity theft through sort of authentication and the like, but we'll come to that later. If you look at purchasing at a point of sale or utilizing a card and an ATM, there's a different experience there than there is if you go shopping online. Everybody is used to tap, contactless payments, the value's going up and up and up. So of course the ease with which someone can take a card and tap it, that's not questioned.
Right.
In fact, I had a contactless transaction approved for over $700. I didn't need to put the PIN in. So it's questionable with regards to the protection I'm being afforded, because as a consumer, I don't feel comfortable. Our security tolerance is zero. So on the basis of the idea of tap and why, just put in the PIN. It's not exactly hard.
Yeah.
And there's enough people that basically look to do that. There's enough videos where you can see how you can disable the NFC on a card if you want to by drilling a hole somewhere.
Really?
The point is if you don't want it to work, it should be up to you to basically say, I don't want that. I don't want that facility.
Okay.
So in terms of how then it works at a point of sales machine is that if you tap the product, we can then come back and say, no, input the PIN. But it's not then the one-time PIN, because again, we're at an age where from a point of sale or an ATM perspective, you're putting something in that you're repeating every time.
Right.
That doesn't change. Everybody knows the 4-digit PIN. So of course, if they're inputting that PIN, has the point of sales machine been compromised in any way? Is there something at the petrol station that's sort of reading, or a video capture, or it's that sort of thing, is that you're giving away a 4-digit PIN. So you've given that away. So the secret and the basis on which that security is reliant is now questionable. So what if through our solution, you retain the one PIN, that's all you have to remember, but in putting it into an OtherPay device, it gives you another PIN, which has the PIN embedded within it. But I could, for example, at a restaurant, give the card to the waitress and tell them what my PIN is. There's no risk to that. People might think, that's odd, but there's nothing odd in the fact that she can't run down the road and, draw money out of an ATM machine. It's only going to work for the one transaction.
Okay.
So point of sale, ATM, one-time PIN, zero tolerance, but you allow the consumer, based on their behaviour, to say, well, I'd be happy with $50 because I don't want to keep on doing that when I'm buying a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
From our perspective, it's not a case of just setting it to 50. It's like, does he shop there often? You know, there's got to be a little bit of history with regards to what you're doing. So it's not a carte blanche. Okay, you want $50, we'll allow it to that level. There are various other metrics and formula in the background. In terms of online shopping, it's slightly different in that we're all now becoming used to not being able to simply put in that security code and the transaction goes through. It gets thrown up on an app, or you'll get sent a code via SMS, or you get a code via text. All of these are different additional layers of security that are being implemented. You don't need it with OtherPay because that security code that's input is generated by OtherPay based on the PIN that you input.
I think that's really good. Particularly, I've had these challenges, you know, when you might be overseas and you're trying to pay for something online and they say, oh, we've sent a text to your phone. And you say, I can't use my phone in this country. How am I supposed to get this text and actually do this transaction? I guess this is kind of avoiding that issue as well.
Well, yeah, it does. I mean, with regards to the friction, this is where some may look on it as having an additional level of friction. But for those people that want the protection, it's not really a level of friction. For those, though, in terms of online shopping, it's like, well, that's actually taking a level of friction away because I don't have the phone with me. The transaction that I'm doing here, have you heard the term card present, card not present? It's a term used whereby if the card is present at a point of sale or an ATM, that's one particular transaction type. If the card is not present, because if you're shopping online, you don't need the card.
Yeah, right.
Because if you know the payment details or if someone's written them down, the card's not required.
Yeah.
With OtherPay, it doesn't matter what you do, it's always card present. Has to be a card present transaction, otherwise you can't actually fulfill the transaction.
Yeah, that makes a whole heap of sense.
And the 3-digit code is effectively your one-time PIN. So the experience is similar. We're not expecting a merchant to do any change to their infrastructure or any major changes to have to be done to the processing platform because otherwise then it wouldn't fly.
Yeah, okay.
We've integrated seamlessly in with what's already there and it's down to the consumer to change their behaviour. Right.
So if you were to, pull back, see where you began and say how big is the problem? Mm-hmm. What are we looking at here and why would people be interested in a solution like this? How many people are affected every day by card or identity fraud that you're trying to protect, essentially?
I think that's a difficult question to answer because statistically you can go online and it's all over the place.
Yeah.
The fundamental fact is that it's there. People are defrauded. Whether you think that, that's not fraud because they get their money back, it's fraud. The individual is basically potentially could have a 4-6 week period of investigation and before they get the money back. So it's like, well, how do they pay the rent this month? There's all of those heard issues that can happen from a consumer's perspective of the pain they suffer. They may get the money back, but somebody's paid for it. So in terms of somebody paying from it, some of the statistics that we used on the campaign were from the Australian. So from a statistical perspective, I remember, there was 1.8 million consumers, $2.2 billion dollars. Those are the sort of figures that you're banning around in Australia alone.
Right.
So are there people that are suffering? Absolutely there are. So from our target market perspective, we're not going out with a fear-mongering campaign for those just the 1.8 million who have suffered. There's also a lot of consumers out there who's like, this is the right thing to do.
Sure.
So if I can contribute and basically stop that from happening, there's tech-savvy consumers that like new technology, and you'll always get a segment of consumers where I don't care, and I'm not going to change their minds.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to try to.
It's interesting because I think that when you think about the victims of card or identity fraud, you always think of an older demographic. I've been the victim of it before.
Yep.
I got a text to my phone saying that I needed to top up my linked account. I actually did need to top up my linked account. So I just clicked it, looked like a website,
right,
put my details in. I didn't think anything of it. I want to caveat this and say this was a couple of years ago before this was so prevalent. But I just immediately went and did it. Westpac went and shut down my accounts. I couldn't get into my accounts for a week because it was obviously a huge problem then. I couldn't get through on the phone and I couldn't access any of my accounts for an entire week. I'm lucky that I've got friends and family that I could turn to and say, hey, can I use a card of somebody's?
Right.
Until this is alleviated. But I'm sure a lot of people don't have that. So if they are victim to this, then what? So,
well, with regards to, I mean, the point that you raise is sort of, I'm not going to confuse between purchase fraud. You were scammed out of somebody that basically sent you a text. That the only thing that we've sort of tried to do in that particular area with regards to a feature we have is that, has anybody ever asked the question that if you're being scammed or called by somebody, what if you could actually get them to prove who they were first? If you take a step back and you sort of think, well, where is this fraud actually? How has it arisen? It hasn't arisen from the point of the identity theft of you. Somebody has already stolen the identity of somebody else to masquerade as somebody else to then try and steal your identity.
Yeah.
So in the first place, we have a feature that tries to basically implement a solution whereby perhaps you could challenge, are you who you're saying you are? Now, from our perspective, that would need buy-in and support of those organizations that ordinarily would text you.
Right.
But fine, that's a strategy that could be put in place. So whether it's telcos, whether it's utilities or whatever, if someone's going to email or contact you, there is a method by which you could turn it around and prove it. And the device, therefore, sort of says, don't trust them, don't go anywhere near it.
Right.
That sort of thing doesn't exist. So as a feature with regards to a scam, that's just one thing that we have. But I mean, scam is so unbelievably broad. It's not what OtherPay is specifically, targeting in its sort of repertoire and weaponry type thing. It's a massive problem, needs to be solved. But if some stop and think of that particular point, is that if you knew who you're dealing with, then there wouldn't be the scam in the first place.
Yeah,
but
right.
we're off-piste a little bit with regards to that. So yes, there's a feature that could protect it if organizations subscribe to it and said, well, yeah, we'll authenticate to you first. So they authenticate to you, then you authenticate to them, and then you can carry on with the dialogue. From a purchasing perspective, as I've said, how it works there is the PIN input. And from an authentication perspective, we're all used to the emails, the one-time codes, basically to loop round and authenticate.
Yeah.
Same thing applies. I don't have the phone. I need to authenticate myself. Type in the PIN, gives you the one-time code. And that's far better authentication than this loop round, which is an assumption that the text came to you. I know it's a pretty good assumption, but it's still an assumption.
Yeah, right. So I feel like your technology is, it's taking the best that you can from technology, but taking it back to basics and saying, why were we trying to fix a problem that wasn't there in the first place? There was codes that were generated originally. I lived in the UK for a while, and if you wanted to log into your online banking, you had a physical dongle that would generate a one-time code so that you could get into it. At the time, I found it frustrating, but from a perspective of nobody being able to get into my accounts, it was pretty amazing.
Yep.
So is that where the inspiration came from to bring it to Australia?
No, I think to Australia is, I could sort of add to that, there's a personal view with regards to I call Australia home. So we were brought here in 1999 by the NZ, fell in love with the place. It is here, but I also find from a technology perspective and an acceptance of technology and in terms of innovation and advance, Australia's way ahead of the UK and Europe with regards to payments and what they do. So coming to a territory which both serves me personally and my family, but also in a dynamic and with a consumer demographic that would really support what we're looking to do. It's always been our issue to establish traction. So establish traction somewhere here, like in Australia, is far easier than thinking of trying to establish traction in the US.
Okay.
We have interested US clients, we have interested UK and European clients, but it's the catch-22. It's like, well, show us this thing working, show us the traction, show us the consumers using it. So that is our first hurdle.
Okay. So you've just raised capital on the Birchal platform. What's next for you in terms of getting that traction and getting the ball rolling in getting this into the hands of users in Australia?
Right. So with regards to that, our aspiration and what we said is clearly about putting the products in the hands of consumers. We have 322 new shareholders who I'm quite sure will be supportive of what we're looking to do, but we're also talking to various other organisations about sort of incubator programs and various other things where we can get 1,000 cards into market to demonstrate the product, to prove the technology, to show that the operating model works. But specifically with regards to OtherPay, what we're keen to do is the first product, the Duo one, which works with the prepaid card.
Right.
It doesn't just work with the prepaid card. The whole solution is predicated on the fact that it could be anything beyond that. I mean, driving license, health card, membership card, airline card. For any card that you currently may have, which you then are forced to do some sort of form of authentication, we could embed our technology within that far more cost effectively than SMS and the apps, and simply it works seamlessly with our device, not compromising the security of anybody that's using it. So if a bank has it, their security's sound. If an airline has it, theirs doesn't conflict with the banks. That's their security. So we can extend it to the point where, yes, that you're not carrying any more cards, but the cards you're carrying can be used in a different way such that you don't have to rely on SMS, emails, and the like.
It's actually saving money for banks and other payment platforms, essentially.
Do, and it's providing a consistency of experience as well.
Right.
Is that ultimately, from a long-term perspective, of course, the aspiration is this. If you can get to that point where they're holding one and they've got cards that then support the same technology, you don't need this other stuff.
Okay. And is your business model, in terms of your revenue streams, would they be coming from a consumer or a business?
Both. We've sort of been through the B2C or the B2B model. Is that as an electronic product, the intent would be to sell it.
Okay.
Not at a price point that goes beyond the point of being considered affordable, viable. So we're sort of thinking maybe around the $50 price point. But that then gives you what you effectively need to support all the others. So from a B2C perspective, it's purely the selling of the product. The OtherPay prepaid program, which then is our program, obviously then means that we can derive revenue from it. But the whole premise of doing that particular program is to demonstrate traction to others that they may then look to deploy it. So at that point, you're looking at unit prices on the product. You're looking at licensing fees on the technology. And it's fairly broad with regards to what the model is, but it's definitely both B2C, B2B.
Okay. So with the digital payment solutions, constantly evolving, what part will OtherPay play in that ecosystem?
So in terms of, it's a good question because it's always asked of us. It's like, yeah, but Apple Pay, cards won't be here in years to come. I heard this 20 years ago. Sit down and have the same conversation with Visa and MasterCard and others. Yes, there's innovation, but at the same time, cards will be here for a long, long time to come. So if we were only focused on card, I think we're fine for the foreseeable future.
Right.
But of course, you need to grow, you need to innovate.
Yep.
And so our technology, whilst embedded within a card, is similarly we're doing R&D around embedding it within a device that can link to a mobile phone. Because fundamentally, if you look at mobile phone, our position in terms of zero tolerance from a security perspective is we're not going to put something on the phone.
Right.
That basically just goes against our beliefs in terms of, now I put something on something. If that ends up being compromised, then that comes back to me. But putting a device, an electronic device that can interact with the phone and do a lot of things these cards do, so to an extent mimicking Apple Pay in a way, in that the experience can be exactly the same. It's not processing it through card emulation, which is basically Apple Pay emulating the card you have. It's through Apple Pay. It's through OtherPay. So we can do various other things with that particular transaction.
Okay. So obviously there's a huge element of security and keeping customer data safe. What kind of measures are you taking to ensure that the customer data that you do take is secure?
So from our perspective, and if you look at the organisation, we don't put ourselves in a position where we'd be exposed to that sort of requirement or threat. The threat still exists,
sure,
but we're working with fully regulated partners that are compliant with the controls that need to be in place to protect data. So we're utilising their licenses, their regulatory framework, their certifications to ensure that we have that particular protection. Mm-hmm. If we ever got to a point where we wanted to basically have the issuing license or we were going to do that sort of thing, then those are sort of issues that we'd need to address at that particular point in time. But at the moment, as a fairly nimble organisation, we're looking at working with all of our key partners that already have those certifications in place.
Okay. And what kind of barriers to entry does OtherPay have when trying to connect with new consumers?
Barrier? Opinion. People's opinions with regards to whether it's Apple Pay, whether it's that fraud doesn't exist anymore, all of those particular things, people are entitled to their opinions. But sure, similarly, you should respect other people's opinions. And if there's someone has gone through the pain that you went through and that others go through and they think, I want that, then that's their choice. So to have others screaming at their top of their voice that Apple Pay is going to take over, cards are not going to be anymore, nobody's going to use that because of the friction. It's a false, it doesn't help. So in terms of the barriers that we sort of have, you just have to work through that. And we do. We've got enough, from the shareholders' perspective, those that are interested, from the consumers that said, I'll definitely use it. We know that there's a market there. So we shouldn't worry about it because, as I said right at the beginning, it's not a one-size-fits-all. If it was one size fits all, I've got a far more difficult task on my hands to try to convince everybody to switch. They don't have to. All of these solutions can coexist, and OtherPay just happens to be one of those in its own vertical, attracting consumers that are happy to use it.
Right. And in terms of your R&D, what were the kinds of audiences that you worked with to try and shape your product?
The product was pretty much shaped by, consumer acceptance of what you're willing to carry. The everyday carrier is a mobile phone and card.
Yep.
So I'm not going to manufacture something that's the size of a digital, the clock on the table sort of thing. So you've got to think the annoyance of carrying the RSA little token and the dongle that you have to carry, because it's not your everyday carry. It's annoying. It doesn't fit in the back pocket. So we were pretty much driven by that, have always been driven by that you're either looking at mobile phone. We're not going to go there because of the security threat to the landscape. But with regards to card, well, yeah, as long as it's the same size. And any individuals that ask, yeah, but does your card fit within a point of sale and ATM? Of course it does. We have to be certified to be that thin such that we'll fit into the existing infrastructure. So we were very much driven by standards, by what exists, by what consumers are willing to carry. Not hard, really. If we'd come out with a product that really was the shape of a brick, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
100%.
Yeah.
So when you're developing a product like this, obviously there's a significant amount of capital that goes into getting this up off the ground.
Yep.
What kind of avenues have you been looking at to grow this capital need? And why did you think that going to equity crowdfunding was a good point of call for you?
So to be fair, like any startup, you look for capital. And what became abundantly clear in the conversation we're having is that nobody denies, that's really interesting technology, but you come right back to that point of traction. Come back when you have traction. We'll be interested in the second round.
But how do you get traction if you don't have funding?
Well, exactly. And so you come back to the point, it's like, where can you get funding? So we were introduced to Birchal on an understanding as well that the voice of that many consumers sort of saying, I put up my hand, really validates the proposition in terms of what you're doing. So
100%.
From a secondary point of view, whilst that brings in the capital, I can also then go for a second round of funding if we need to get to that particular point. With 322 shareholders behind us, a product that's actually got traction. And that changes the whole dynamic in terms of raising those funds. So this was perfect for us in terms of ticking a lot of boxes that nobody could then criticize and come back. Because if you've got one small strategic shareholder, it's his opinion. I've got 322. That's quite a telling sort of story to basically take forward with us.
Yeah.
And I'm quite sure that those 322 will be users of the product themselves, and then we can sort of extend from there. So I think like a lot of startups, we weren't lucky enough to find that one investor that was willing to basically take the risk until we can demonstrate the traction.
Yeah, and I think that you've got now these new shareholders on board that you can speak to about, how the product works. You can get their feedback. You can understand their unique problems and the unique solutions that they might have.
Yep.
Have you had any unexpected outcomes from having these new shareholders on board in terms of, have they come to you with specific stories that they've had or any kind of way that they want to get involved in the business?
To be honest, no. From our perspective, though, no. I mean, we're putting a campaign together whereby we want to extract that sort of intelligence from them. I think you'll know from the campaign that these were a lot of retail sort of new investors coming in, seeing something very exciting, new investors. So from our perspective, it's to lead them through the process, and to hold them through that. They've obviously seen something that's like, they like it, they support it. We've obviously had enough emails of support in terms of like, I want one, how quickly can I get one? That's really the early stage sort of thing. But with regards to our own research, there's a lot of things that we want to extract from them intelligence-wise with regards to, we know you're going to use it, but now let's basically find out, who's had the problem, what else could you potentially use it for, what are the other non-financial cards we could potentially do. So we're deriving intelligence from them that if I now go into a commercial client with evidence of consumers that are putting up their hands and saying, I want to use this, it changes that whole sales dynamic. Far better conversation I could be having with them, as opposed to, look, this is great, give us a punt. 100%. Going in with a number of people that actually want the card changes the whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously there's a considerable amount of technology that goes into creating a product like OtherPay.
Yep.
Is it concerning to look at how technology could play a role in potentially sabotaging anything that you've already built or grown. If you will look at AI, I mean, that in terms of scams and fraud is a huge issue, and it's a terrifying prospect for a lot of people. Do you foresee anything like that becoming an issue for your payment platform?
No. It goes back, I mean, we embrace AI. I mean, part of our particular solution, as we say, is that ultimately we want to get to a point where that sort of selection of how you spend and how you do it is just autonomously selected for you. It's like that would be the most economical product to use. That's the best reward. All of these things are factors within the formula that we're looking to put together. So we want to benefit and leverage AI. But I think, as you said earlier, in terms of going back to basics, you can be incredibly clever with security sometimes, but in being clever, you've effectively either leave a back door or somebody's going to target it. Just keep it simple.
Yeah.
If you break the formula down in terms of what we have, it can't be denied that if it's used as intended, as was the original intent of EMV being chip and pin of the card, the idea at that point was, well, if it's used as intended, then you can't be compromised. But the fraudsters have adapted. They're reading the pins. They're working out, so once I've got that, so you can't sit there and sort of say, well, yeah, if that's used as intended, it can't be compromised. But if ours is, it's fair to say, well, it can't be. Because how can somebody track and backtrack? And it's like, that simply can't be done. Unrealistic expectation with regards to somebody doing it. So we're not looking to be clever. When people sometimes ask, what about biometrics and this and that? Not really. Doesn't really scale. Don't feel comfortable with it. Somebody on our card will be leaving the thumbprint on anyway. So all of those sort of things, just take the sexy away.
Yeah.
And just keep it simple. What works and what solves the problem. And this does. The only sort of sexy thing we had to come up with is technology and something that was thin enough that will go in the wallet. But beyond that, I don't need to make it any more sexy than it is.
Yeah,
it does what it says on the tin.
So if you're looking forward, strategically speaking, to the next 6 to 12 months and getting the product into market, what's the first step?
First step is obviously getting the first 1,000 products into the hands of consumers.
Right.
Now, ideally, that's going to be through a prepaid program, but it could be through a non-financial program. The key point being is that we need those cards out there, people using them and demonstrating how the technology works. Right. That's the traction.
And how do you find that user base?
So from the user, we already have 322 of them. With regards to the others, I think, as you would have seen through the expression of interest, and whether we're just doing social media advertising or whatever advertising, that we're only looking for another 600 or so supporters of that. And we had enough of those sort of supporters coming in and viewing. So we don't fear we'll easily get the 1,000 that we need to do the pilot. That's fine. One appreciates thereafter, which is why you need more funding, is that marketing and advertising is not cheap.
Right.
And so if you're going to do it properly, you obviously need the funds to do so. So at the moment, we're dealing with lower volumes, for which we don't need a ridiculous marketing or advertising budget. So on that basis, we're confident we'll get the 1,000. And then at that point, you can then rotate through here's the traction and securing more capital.
Right. So you come from a banking background. What are the key elements of that you've brought to being a founder and creating this business today?
I think in terms of, it's difficult because I left the bank to do this. So my own sort of frustrations within is being heard.
Yeah, right.
From a security perspective, I'll always remember having been here for a few years, and I was asked, having been here for a few years, have you fixed the problem? But from a security perspective, it's never gonna be fixed. And as we continue to look year on year, there are more threats coming and such. So I'm either within a banking sector where I'm continually adapting to follow various flows, or I decided to concentrate on specific specialities within the areas of purchase, identity, authentication. And that's what I've sort of, focused on. So for my own mental health and my ability to sort of make a change, I felt I wanted to step out of the bank and basically sort of drive something back in.
Right.
Because it is very difficult, from an internal perspective, any CSO or somebody basically having to convince the board of both the expenditure and the need. What I have found interesting, you've probably noticed on TV as well, is all of the banks now, and I remember sort of suggesting 20 years ago that this should be done, is that they had enough things that they could advertise to the public in terms of what they're doing for security, whether it's ANZ Falcon or whether the various other banks in terms of advertising the fact that they're trying to protect you. They see the value of security. So it's nice to see that it's gone that way. My argument is simply, it's great to see the value of security. Why don't you give consumers a solution that actually solves the problem? As opposed to telling them we'll detect when there's fraud. It's a bit late, isn't it? you've now got to suffer the consequences of the next 6 weeks of trying to get your money back. But they did find it, great. But I wish it didn't happen in the first place.
So is that the key decision maker for you when you decided that you didn't want to work with the bank anymore? Was that you didn't want these mistakes happening on a day-to-day and you having to see them up front?
I think having been through, the ANZ and the Westpac, you're going through a cycle.
Right.
And having done that sort of thing, you can see that cycle will continue.
Yeah.
And will continue in terms of another threat will come in, and it's very, very difficult to sort of, continue to do that way. And I wanted to make a demonstrable difference and a positive difference. So if I can come out and control something that is my belief, and it's my opinion, and as we said at the beginning, I respect other people's opinions, but I know there's enough people around me that support the view, the work we've done with MasterCard, and they see that there's a solution worth pursuing here. And I would love to see it see the light of day. And I believe through Birchal and given what we've done, we'll actually basically get there now.
And so you're still working with the banks to combat this problem. It's not, us versus them kind of situation.
No. I've been back in to have those conversations, and it's exactly the same as the investors. Come back when you have traction.
It's chicken egg.
It always has been. It always has been. So unless, the proposition is there, but they're not going to take the risk of doing something that somebody else hasn't done. What if it doesn't work? So if you look at consumer attrition and their fear with regards to if we implement change, are they going to basically jump ship and go somewhere that's not implementing that as a solution? My argument has always been, you're not pushing it on everybody. You're offering it to those that basically want to use it. But that didn't really change a great deal, other than they get where I'm coming from. But when you've got traction, then come back.
I think
so my focus is on traction.
Right. It's an unbelievably frustrating conversation that so many founders are having with venture capitalists or banks trying to get those loans, is come back when you have traction. What kind of advice would you give to those founders who are coming up against those roadblocks?
If you believe in it, don't give up. We all have a dream and this sort of thing, but of course it takes money. From our perspective, we were very fortunate to be introduced to Birchal because we were having these repeated conversations in terms that everybody's interested. You can see the interest is there, and you get to a point, and then you can see what's coming. It's like, come back when you're looking at the next raise, when you've got traction. So it's difficult. I couldn't suggest it. It's not a carte blanche. So, go with Birchal, because it is different for everybody. For us, it worked, fortunately, because if I can't get to that point of traction, then my journey ends, which would be a real shame because I put a lot into this and I fundamentally believe in it. Yeah,
and at the end of the day, you're not just getting funding from a raise such as this. You're actually getting these new ambassadors of your products. You're getting people who can actually utilize it, give you feedback, and help you develop the product further in the market. So the traction's there in and of itself. It's perfect
for us. And think back to your earlier point in terms of the market research that we'll get from that. These are our people. These are our ambassadors out there using the product. We can streamline it, tweak it, change it according to what they think. That's the whole part of the, the pilot and improving the product. We're confident it's a seamless, easy to use product, but it'll be interesting to get that feedback. But ultimately, it does what it says on the tin. Whether there's an order of sequence that slightly changes because it's a usability issue, then that's fine. But it's not going to change what you do at the end of the day. You'll tap it and you'll input a one-time PIN. That's it.
Love it. Thank you so much for coming in and having a chat with me, Simon. I feel
like
we could yap all day, honestly. It's been really inspiring to see your journey to date. And I'm really, really excited to see what OtherPay does in the future and how you utilize your new ambassadors to really grow the product and the platform itself.
Keep an eye. Look forward to telling you how it goes.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.